This video could save you thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I say that because had I seen this video 5 years ago, I would have saved that amount of money. This is what I needed to see and needed to hear. And what I'm gonna do is try and show you how you can massively improve, if not eliminate, any chronic conditions that you are battling. And the caveat that I have here is that this is not a magic pill. It takes hard work, but it does work. And if you're anything like me, like I was 5 years ago, you are desperate for help and you are willing to try anything. And honestly, that's why I have been hesitant to make this video. I don't want to show up as a false prophet. I am really mindful of how people are going to receive this because it's hard to hear. And so I've had a lot of resistance to it, but we're gonna do it because I think more good will come of it than harm. So when I say hundreds of thousands of dollars, I am not kidding. That is how much I spent on coaches, on body work, energy work, acupuncture, PRP, Reiki, you name it. I tried it. Traditional side, energy side, doesn't matter. And none of them worked. And I just gave up hope. My goal is to try and get you over that hump without having to go through the chasm that I went through. And I'm gonna make the case that you on your own are able to heal yourself. But what you need is a reason to believe that. You need to see the world with fresh eyes. In this world, there is this benevolent force, God, if you will, the universe, spirit, whatever you want to call it. And that force wants you to become a badass. It wants you to become the fullest expression of your soul. There's this idea, I think it comes from Jung, but I could be wrong, about the acorn and the oak tree. And the idea is that contained within every acorn, within every seed, is this great and powerful oak. But you've got to go through the processes necessary in order to turn into that thing. And that is your soul. That is your dharma, your path. You are born into this world as a seed, and this divine force wants you to turn into the oak tree. And that force is going to guide you, and it's going to tell you exactly what you need to do and when you need to do it. But your job, the thing that you need to work on, is how to hear it, how to listen, and have the patience and the gentleness to stick through those changes over the long run that it is asking of you. Essentially, you need to believe that God is working in your life. That you can trust how things are going even when they don't seem okay. That you can trust this chronic condition even though it generates so much pain and makes you show up in ways that you don't want to show up and changes your schedule and forces you to not do things and all the stuff that goes along with having these chronic conditions. When you believe this, you can live your life a different way. And I know you're probably thinking, must be easy for you to say, dude who's sitting on the other side of the camera in front of a whiteboard, what the hell do you know? You've had an easy life, I bet. It's easy for you to think that the world is looking out for you. And let me just tell you who I am and what I've gone through, parts of it. I grew up with 2 alcoholic and addict parents. When I was 5 years old, my father left the picture. I started doing heroin when I was 16 years old after a very rough adolescence, fighting all the time and getting into trouble. I spent 5 years in the Marine Corps running away from that period of my life and was in war and supported a war. I opened and lost a business, a pretty big and successful business that I thought was my life's work. I contributed to ruining a marriage So I have not had this easy path that makes it easy for me to believe this. But coming into this belief has changed everything. And all the stuff that I just said, all of those things and all the stories that I made up around them manifested in my life as chronic back pain. Also just kind of chronic tension over my whole body. Didn't matter where it is. And it was debilitating. This wasn't just pain. I would wake up every day and I would have to do an hour of stretching and mobility work to be able to move, period. I could not bend over. I could not tie my shoes. I could not pick up my daughter. I could not exercise, which is a huge part of my life prior to this. I could not do yoga. You name it. It was brutal. I was in so much pain. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sit. I couldn't stand. And what I've come to realize is that was my body trying to get my attention. And chronic conditions show up in lots of different ways. This was just the way that my soul wanted to grab my attention, but it could be skin conditions, it could be gut issues, it could be weight issues, it could be, like I said, joint pain. Here's the reality of the situation is that most conditions in the healthcare system are chronic conditions. Upwards of 90% of healthcare costs go to treating chronic conditions. And I believe that almost all of them are indicators that we are not doing something that we should be doing, or we're doing something that we need to stop doing. It is our soul screaming for one of those two things, our higher self's method for gaining our attention. And after it has screamed as loud as it can, it starts to physically harm you because you are not listening. And even with it screaming as loud as it can, even with these chronic health conditions, we still refuse to listen. Because instead we focus on the symptoms, because the scariest thing that we can do is surrender ourselves to the universe. It's easier to focus on the pain. It's easier to focus on the discomfort. Even though it sucks, at least we know what we're getting ourselves into. We know what we're dealing with. It's not the unknown, which we as humans have just this massive fear. So we'd rather suffer than trust in something outside of ourselves. And you might have a lot of resistance to the idea of surrender. I know that I certainly did. But if you've tried everything else in the world, what do you have to lose? That was ultimately the question that I asked myself. And it was interesting. There was a book, and a lot of you are going to laugh at this, but it is what it is. There's a book called The Universe Has Your Back. And the author's name is Gabby, I believe it's Bernstein. And I am not the target audience for this book. Gabby writes to like 40-year-old women. Yet, this book showed him up in my life 3 different times over the course of one day after never having heard of it before. Once I got home, I'm not kidding, it was in my mailbox. And there was, not from like an Amazon package, just the book. To this day, I have no idea how it got there. I went into work, sitting on the table when I first walk in the door is another copy of the same book. And my rule is if I see something 3 times, I have to pay attention to it. So that was 2. And at that point, I flipped it open, I read some of it, the language didn't resonate, the messaging didn't resonate, like clearly this wasn't for me. I get back home after work later that day, and I get a deck of cards in the mail. And they are the cards for The Universe Has Your Back. I could not believe it. And so I was like, okay, fine, I'll read the book. And it brought me to my knees and it brought me to tears. And in that moment, I made the choice that I could not carry the world on my shoulders anymore. And finally, I surrendered. And that's how I wound up here. I was defeated. And at the time, I was so depressed. And I thought that there was no way ever that I could get back to feeling normal again. But surrender is what started me on the path to normalcy, started me on the path to more than normalcy, to a beautiful, peaceful, loving life. And I want to be clear here, there's a big difference between surrender, which essentially is a place of trust. You letting it go and trusting that something higher than you is going to look out for you, is going to take control, versus giving up, which is a victim mindset. It's a place of defeat. It's like, I'm no longer going to do this because I don't think that I can win. These are two totally different things. And this is where the gene keys come into the story for me. They were the system that helped me to find faith and trust in the universe or in God. And there were many other things along my journey that helped steer me to that realization and be open to these ideas. So it wasn't just the gene keys, but they were a big part of it. And it's important to know as you're dealing with this stuff, I'm not saying that you need the gene keys. You don't. What you need is a relationship with the divine. The gene keys are just a system that helped me to get there. For me, the gene keys felt like a map that directed my inner physician. There's this saying, physician, heal thyself. And that is what the gene keys were for me. And I'm not saying that some of the things that I listed earlier, like PRP, like energy work, like acupuncture, like chiropractor, don't help, because I do think they help. But I don't think that they are the whole answer. I think some physical modalities in this plane of existence are necessary and can really help us. They give us relief and they can be kind of an anchor to return to and support. However, they're not the whole answer. There's a deeper part of this. Those physical things are addressing the symptoms and they can give you improvement for a period of time, but they're not going to fix the underlying problem because they're not the full answer. And that's why we constantly are on this like roller coaster. Oh, I'm feeling great. Oh, there's that terrible pain again. Oh, things are awesome and they're terrible. Because we treat the symptoms and that's when we're feeling great, but then the underlying cause is still there. And so when we stop treating the symptoms, we drop right back down to the bottom of that roller coaster. So there's a man named Dr. John Sarno, who went to Columbia for his MD and then later taught rehabilitation medicine at NYU. And he wrote a book called Healing Back Pain, which I found a few years ago. And he essentially says the same thing that I'm saying right now, that most chronic conditions are not physiological. In his case, though, what he says is that they are psychological. And basically in that book, Healing Back Pain, what he says is that there's a problem with your emotional state, with your intellect, that is manifesting in your physical body. And he has had a ton of success, much higher success rate than back surgery, in healing people from their conditions, just with this one single understanding that it might not be something wrong with the physical structures of the body. Where I vary from the doc is in the solution. So I don't believe it's psychological. I believe that it is spiritual. So this isn't something in our brain, it's something in our causal body. Our soul is just screaming for something to change. And the DNA tells our cells what to do. But we know now from epigenetics that our internal state affects our DNA, affects how our genes express. There's a message that is coming from our body that is being corrupted in translation. So the code of our DNA is being corrupted somehow, and it's manifesting in our physical body in a way that is causing us pain or causing us this chronic condition. The message is somehow getting warped, and we have to figure out how to eliminate the noise and the interference our DNA is receiving so that our bodies can manifest in a way that doesn't have this chronic condition. And corruption is actually the shadow of the 50th gene key. So I'm going to read a quote now from there. At the shadow frequency, data, in this case meaning your interpretation of what's happening to you, that is processed by the human brain, is translated through the medium of fear. As this occurs, data is corrupted, leading to a slanted manifestation in the world. In genetics, the 50th shadow has much to do with the way in which RNA copies DNA. RNA is a chemical substance similar to DNA whose role is to transcribe aspects of your genetic code in order that new proteins can be formed. In other words, RNA is a messenger that reads and copies the instructions for life. In the process known as transcription, messages can be misinterpreted before they are translated. So that basically, I think, is the root of this problem. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is, where does this corruption come from? Why is this signal being corrupted? And I think the answer to that is the collective. We are in a sick society that is stuck in a worldview of competition, scarcity, and fear. And we have been conditioned into the corruption by our society. And it is so hard to debug the system and to be able to see things as they actually are. And that's really the question, is how do we begin to send the proper signals back to ourselves? And I think the answer to that corruption is honesty. I think it's honesty with ourselves. And then the other big piece here, I think, is intimacy with others. We are communal beings. So the question that we must ask ourselves is, where are we out of balance in our lives? Honestly, answering that question is a way to enter the 50th gift. So I said the shadow is corruption. And the gift is equilibrium. I don't think I spelled that right, but you get the idea. So to solve this corruption, we must find equilibrium. We must find balance. Now, I think one of the biggest things that stops us from having this equilibrium is trauma. That's big T trauma and little t trauma. Trauma is one of the greatest contributors to keeping us stuck, to not taking action in the direction that we want to go. And the reason that we want to go in that direction is because our soul wants to go in that direction. But because of this corruption, we believe that we're not safe and we don't take action in that direction. And then our body throws up one of these chronic health conditions because it's like, yo, I'm telling you to go that way. You're hearing that I'm telling you to go that way, and yet you are stuck. And this trauma is the reason that that stuckness is happening. It freezes a part of our being, and instead of seeing what's actually happening in real time with a situation, we run all of our perceptions through the filter of what happened to us in our past. And because of that, we fall into the same repeating cycles and the same repeating patterns. And this trauma is held in our bodies until we are able to discharge it. So there's a really cool video. If you just go onto YouTube and search for polar bear trauma release. So basically it's these scientists who are in a helicopter and they're flying across the Arctic or the Antarctic. I can never remember where polar bears are. And they're doing research on polar bears. So they're hanging out of this helicopter. They've got a tranq gun, like a tranq dart gun, and this polar bear is running across the ice, and they shoot it with a tranquilizer dart so that they can measure its paws and its teeth and all of that kind of stuff. So they shoot it, the helicopter lands, they go over, they do their thing, and then they back up. And then what you see as the polar bear starts to come out of this state, this tranquilized state, is it starts to run. So it's laying on its side. So if you've seen a dog like dreaming and they're kind of barking and their legs are moving, that's what this polar bear is doing. So he's coming back to and he's running. He's in his flight response. And you see his legs moving faster and faster, and he's still not even standing up. He's not totally present, but he knows he's got to work this response out, because if he doesn't, it will stay stuck in his body. And after a few seconds or maybe even a minute of this running, all of a sudden there's this big deep, deep inhale and exhale and another. And you can see this polar bear's nervous system regulating itself. Unfortunately, when we are 7, 10, 13 years old, nobody gave us the tools to allow this trauma to move through us. And so it gets stuck in our body. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. I can't pronounce the author's name, so I'm not gonna try, but it is a great book, and I think it's Vanderkolk is the author's name. You should definitely check it out. And although trauma is one of the big causes to corruption, I don't think it is the only cause. And therefore, if you only focus on something like somatic experiencing or TRE or tapping or shaking or any of these modalities that we can use to release trauma, I don't think that that is enough to solve the chronic condition. Because even after we've processed the trauma, we still have to tell ourselves a new story. We have to tell ourselves a healthy story. And that's tough to do when you're living in a sick society. But telling yourself that healthy story is what allows you to follow the messages of your soul. And that's where spiritual work becomes part of the picture here. Having faith in the universe and trusting in that benevolent force that I mentioned earlier allows us to settle into our physical bodies. And in the gene keys, the activation sequence is all about settling in to your physical body. Compared to the Venus sequence that is more emotional body, the Pearl sequence that is more mental body, Venus sequence about opening our heart, Pearl sequence about prosperity, activation sequence is about physical embodiment. It's about being a human fully and knowing what you are at the center of you, at the core of your being. That's what the activation sequence does. It makes us feel at home in our body. My journey with the activation sequence is almost too far-fetched for people to believe. But it is the thing that transformed that level of tightness and an inability to function that I talked about earlier into my genius, an ability to stand tall, an ability to move through the world again, an ability to flow and to dance. And basically, the way that it showed up for me is every time I dove into the activation sequence, as I dove deeper and deeper, I would sit in meditation, I would sit in contemplation, and something crazy would start to happen, probably 80% plus of the time. It's like something took over my body. I'm not kidding. And I had to like shift around and take big breaths and push them into certain areas of my body. And sometimes I had to stand up and it was like I was not in control. I just had to move my body in these ways. I had to breathe in certain ways. And it looked absolutely insane. I felt like a transformer. And during this process, my back would pop and crack and like I would have these intense rushes of energy. And then it started to happen just in my normal life. Like I would be like sitting at my desk at work and all of a sudden I get sucked into this state and it would be 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours of just like needing to shift and move and push and breathe, stand and sit and kneel and lay and it was wild. I had to like move my body like a snake at times and sometimes in front of other people and I felt really uncomfortable, but there was nothing that I can do. There was this force. And at the same time, especially when other people weren't around, when I could like settle down and settle in, I cannot tell you just the indescribable bliss that was released at certain times with certain breaths. Like I would get transported to a different plane of reality. And at the same time, they could be incredibly overwhelming and incredibly scary because I just felt like I was disconnected from my body, from myself. Like there was no anchor. There was no frame of reference. But what started to happen is gradually over time, as I did this activation sequence work, is the tension around my spine began to decrease. It began to let go. I began to get more range of motion back. And after years of feeling stuck in my body and wishing I had a different one and all of this anger and despair, I started to feel at home. And it's interesting to me that my spine was the problem. Because in the activation sequence, the last sphere that you get to is the sphere of purpose. And the sphere of purpose is keynoted with 6 different physical keynotes. So if you're not familiar with the Gene Keys system, there are these different spheres. You get this profile. You can go to genekeys.com and get your free profile so that you can see what yours is in this area. And each of the different spheres, you'll see a number, 1 through 64, a decimal point. So it might look like this. I'll use my purpose, which is 60.2. So this first part, 60, that's the gene key that is taken from my sphere. And then this 0.2, that's the line it's called. So I'm a second line there. And in the sphere of in each of the different spheres, the keynotes mean different things, although it's the same energy underlying all of them. I have videos on all of that stuff if you're curious. But in the sphere of the purpose, the keynotes are parts of the body. And so my second line is about posture and fluids. So I'll talk more about that here in a second, but line 1, and this is the sphere of your purpose, and that sphere shows up in the Venus and the activation sequence. So I'm specifically talking about how it relates to the activation sequence here. So the first line is physicality and bones. And the second line is posture and fluids. Third line is movement and blood. Fourth line, breath and rhythm. Fifth line is voice and frequency. And the sixth line is intent and cells. So I'm a second line, right? I told you I was 60.2 in the sphere of that purpose. And my issue, posture, was a back issue. And I have a hunch that the problems that manifest in our bodies are tied to these lines in some way. Now, the caveat that I have here is that the profile is hologenetic. So what that means is that each sphere affects every other sphere. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you are a line 3 in your purpose, that your chronic issue is going to be a blood issue. It's not that simple. But there's just something in me that knows that there is some contributing factor here based on these lines. And the fix to the issue that shows up for you, so however your body manifests your chronic condition, the fix is contained in the suffering somehow. That is the seed. And so take a look at what that issue is and think symbolically around it. How might that issue resolve itself based on the symbolism? So again, for example, posture. For me, I already told you, I felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. I felt like I had to do everything myself. And so imagine this weight here just crushing my spine down. So for me, it was about surrender. It was about letting go of that weight, which allowed me to open up and improve my posture, which therefore improved my spine. And then once you've identified that thing, which I know is easier said than done, then you've got to find the courage to honor that message, which is no easy task because it involves seeing the world in a totally different way. It's not a simple fix like going to the doctor and getting a shot. It's not as easy as quitting a job. It takes a shift in worldview. You can't just move. You can't just leave a relationship. It's about how you relate to the job that you have, how you relate to the place that you live, how you relate to your relationship. And I can say this because I'm advising you based on the mistakes that I made. I did shut down a business. I did leave a marriage. And what I realized from those things is they did not solve the problem because they are not what was causing the problem. I was. Oftentimes, when you change internally, external shifts occur. But we have to start on the inside. Then you need to be ready for the external changes that the universe serves up. And that's what a lot of us are avoiding. We're comfortable, we're safe. Even if we're hurting, we know, like I said at the beginning. And so as things shift and change, your awareness shifts or changes. And that means that there is nothing to force here. The shifts and changes are going to happen naturally. And your job is just to remember that each shift that occurs is coming from this force that loves you on a deep, deep level. And there's another way that it takes big courage to do this. And that's in owning something that is hard to own. And it's a big part of the resistance to me making this video. And it is that you are the problem. You've got to own it. You've got to see that it's something that you are doing or not doing. I believe that to be the case with 95% plus of chronic conditions. Not all of them, of course. There is never a situation, or rarely a situation, where you can say all. But most people have to be willing to own that. No blaming somebody else for how you're feeling. No more putting your dependence on external practitioners to quote unquote fix you. It's so much easier to think that it's genetics or that it's some like external event that happened to you. But that is, if this is your belief as to why you have a chronic health condition, that is a victim mentality. And I know this is hard to hear. And it's not to say that you weren't wronged in some way, that something really bad and really terrible didn't happen to you. I believe that it did. I know that it did to me. And I know that that thing will not define me because I will be of service. Because that is my responsibility, because that is my acorn, and I will turn into the oak tree. Every day that you continue to think that it's genetics or it's because of this external event is another day that you cannot get better. Another place that can be helpful to look in the gene keys is the sphere of your radiance. So your radiance represents your physical health, as well as your vitality. So your radiance essentially dictates your aura, your inner light. And if your physical body has an issue somewhere, it's like putting a pair of aura sunglasses on. Everything is just like a little more dull, a little less vibrant, like so much energy went into my back pain. Dealing with it, avoiding it, trying to heal it. And because all of that energy was siphoned there, the energy that I had to go out into the world to attract the things that I wanted to attract to me was diminished. So look at the gene key and the line that you have in the sphere of your radiance. And whatever gift you have there in that sphere, that is what you need to feel fully alive and fully healthy. Then you can look at the line of the sphere of your radiance. So like I said before, mine is actually 56.2 in the sphere of my radiance. So that's my gene key, 56, and then I'm a second line there. And the lines, that's what you need to allow the gift to shine through. So the gift is what you need to feel fully alive and healthy. And the line is what allows that gift to shine through. So first line is solitude, second line marriage, third line interaction, fourth is friendship, fifth is impact, sixth is nurture. Those things are not literal, so you need to be careful. And if you want more on that, go to my video that has the 6 lines of radiance. So the 56 gene key at the gift frequency is enrichment. So I need to do things that enrich my soul. And I need to do them with someone or something that I have a very close relationship with. Remember, the second line is marriage, as an example. Going another couple steps back on the golden path, which is part of the activation sequence, we've got the pathway of breakthrough. And I've got a video on the pathway of breakthrough, so again, you can check that out. But breakthrough comes from working in the field of the first 2 gene keys that you come in contact with as you are doing the golden path. So as you start the activation sequence, you start at what's called your life's work. And then the next gene key that you move to is what's called your evolution. And these 2 actually work as a unified field. They are what are called programming partners. Again, check out the video if you want to learn a little bit more about that. And I won't go into detail to what these things mean, but essentially life's work is what you're here to do in the world, and evolution is the biggest challenge that you're going to face over and over in that doing. And in order to get your breakthrough, you have to raise the frequency passing through those two gene keys. We've got to increase the vibration, the frequency. And the way that you do that, the Reader's Digest version, is that you make decisions that come from your heart. Your intellect, heart is greater than intellect. Your intellect is what got you stuck. Your intellect is what got you into this situation, this chronic health issue, and it's not what is going to get you out. But given enough heart-led choices, your breakthrough is just a matter of time. And as I said, this is like a huge aha moment. This breakthrough is like a, oh my God, everything is different, that totally changes your model of the world. For me, this came actually in a medicine ceremony, in a plant medicine ceremony, which, if you've never heard my spiel on plant medicine, it is extremely valuable, extremely potent, and can be extremely dangerous. You need to make sure you do your diligence in any plant medicine work, working with any plant medicine practitioners, making sure that you're aware of your psychology, that you're aware of any limitations that you have with SSRIs, etc. So that's my caveat there. But for me, I was in a psilocybin ceremony, and the facilitator of that ceremony did things that I can't unsee. And for clarity, I was acting as what's called an angel in this ceremony. So I was not under the influence of the medicine. I was sober. And I watched things happen that to my logical brain made absolutely zero sense. I could not comprehend, could not understand, could not give a reason. But I know what I saw. And from that moment, there is no going backwards. Everything was just different from that point forward. And once that moment happens, it's like you see through new eyes, and it is a matter of time before everything changes, both inside and outside, as long as you stick with it. And this is not a fast process, which is why I say you've got to stick with it. This for me was in 2020. And I am still unwinding physically right now. I still have tightness and tension, and some days are better than others, but I am 90% better, and it is a big deal. And what has come more and more online for me throughout this process is my radiance. It's the reason that people watch what you're doing right now, right? I'm talking about this like esoteric concept and your suffering and your trauma. And I'm encouraging people to look death in the face. And yet it still resonates with you, or with some people anyway, because of my radiance. And your radiance is tied hologenetically to what's called the sphere of attraction in the gene keys. And the sphere of attraction, the reason they're tied together is that it's largely dictated down here by your aura. So as you become more interesting to people, because your light draws them in and they want what you have, they can see this change, or like you're a different person, you have a different way of operating than most people in the world, and they want that, even though they might not know what it is. And that force brings the right people into your life at exactly the right moment to create those changes in your outer life that I spoke about earlier. And that's why I say you don't need to do anything externally. You change internally, and your radiance and the sphere of attraction take care of everything else. They call all those things in that need to be called in. And then the last place I want to go is to just think about the idea of falling into our purpose, which is the last sphere we get to in the activation sequence. It's at the very base of our spine if we lay the profile over a human body. And for the first time, when you truly fall into your purpose, you're going to be able to take a deep breath, and you're going to feel safe, and you're going to realize that you don't have to struggle to survive. And in that moment, we realize that we are both body and soul. So often we identify with one or the other. The collective certainly identifies here, but many seekers make the opposite but equally as detrimental decision to only focus on soul. We are both of those things. We like money and sex, but we also like God and love. And there's nothing wrong with either of those things. They're treated as mutually exclusive, but they aren't. We are both always. And our purpose is knowing what we really are and the level of power that we actually have. And that's why I decided that I am going to muster up the courage to talk about this, even though I know it's going to have some blowback. And I know some people are going to disagree and be upset with me. But I know the truth. And even though I can't explain it in words, I know what's at the core of my being and the power that I have and the power that you have, because you have the exact same thing. So as we come to the end of this, I want to read a quote to you from a woman named Marcia Angel, or Angel, I'm not sure, but she was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine for over 20 years. So this is like one of the top, if not the top medical journal in the United States. And what she said is this: it is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. Let me say that again. I'm going to paraphrase. It is no longer possible to believe in the clinical research that is published or rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. And then she goes on to say she wishes that wasn't the case. Basically, what she is saying is that the medical system is broken. We all know that. In the US, there's big insurance, there's big pharma, there's big food, there's all of these things. They're designed to keep you stuck and stop you from taking this action. Oh, it makes me angry. And it makes me hopeful. Because there is a different way. And more people are starting to open their hearts and their minds to it. So I just want to close with a couple of caveats. Remember, I am not a doctor. Seek medical advice and then make a decision for yourself. Also, I just talked for quite a long time about how the answers are inside of you. So although I can help, and I'm sure people are going to reach out and I would be honored to help, oftentimes I'm going to point back to you. I'm not here to give you answers. Where I can help is help dive deeper into the questions and just share my experience. I'll leave you with this: physician, heal thyself. I'd love to see you at a wisdom call. If you can make it, come and connect with the community. The next one's in a couple weeks. Thank you. Till next time.